We're live in Leeds, the Eye to Eye studio.
The centre of the TEFL world.
Hello and welcome to this very first episode of TEFL Talk, the new TEFL podcast from Eye to Eye and Love TEFL. My name is Jenny, and in the past I've taught in Poland and in the UK, and now I work here at Eye to Eye. And in this first episode I'm joined by Issie.
Hello, I'm Issie. I've previously worked in Vietnam as a TEFL teacher, and now I work at Love TEFL.
What's coming up on today's show, you may ask? Well, we've got some questions from you at home, which we'll be answering together. We'll be talking through some of our favourite anecdotes from our time in the classroom, as well as giving you some top tips for how to deal with your classroom too. And we'll be talking about what to expect when you first start teaching. Right at the end of the episode, we'll be giving you a very exclusive and very amazing promo code that you can use on all of Eye to Eye's products for teaching and travelling. Whoop whoop. So, I thought we could start off today, Izzy, by answering some questions that have come through to us already. So, we'll give you our first question.
Great.
This comes in to us from Jazz, who asks, do you think learning the country's language when teaching abroad is more beneficial or useful? And would you say it helps to build a rapport with your students faster?
That's a really good question, because before I went to Vietnam to teach, I found it really hard to comprehend how I would teach English to a group of people, especially children who have no English understanding, and I have no Vietnamese understanding. I just couldn't figure out, how is that possible? Are we just going to be kind of doing games of charades, or, you know?
Yes.
There was a bit of charades involved, so yes. But it seems a really strange concept to be able to do that. But actually, it was fine. I did start learning Vietnamese and continue learning Vietnamese for the whole time I was there. And I found it really useful for day-to-day life. It's nice to be able to communicate with your neighbours and ask basic questions when you're out and about, have a bit of nice conversation with local people. It's definitely worth doing, I would say. I didn't personally find it beneficial for teaching, simply because the teachers want you to speak English all the time. They, in my job anyway, I found they wanted me to speak English 24/7. Even if I understood something in Vietnamese, the kids said that don't respond in Vietnamese. It was very much, no, you are 100% English, don't say a word of the local language. They need to be forced to use English and practice it. So for teaching, I didn't find it beneficial, but for living abroad, yeah, really, really useful. And you'll feel at home quicker as well if you're using the local language, or trying to at the very least. Mm-hmm. What did you find with Poland?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same. It was really helpful in my life outside of my job to be able to buy train tickets and go out for dinner. I guess both Polish and Vietnamese are really hard, so I think I only just scratched the surface. And within school, I think it really depended. So I tried to only have my classes in English and only have students speaking in English as much as possible. But there were times when I would look up the word in Polish and say it to the students.
That's a good idea.
It was... So, for example, and I still remember this word, the word in Polish for avalanche is lawina, because it was easier for me to say, okay, lawina, than it is to try and explain what an avalanche is, or pull up a YouTube video or draw a picture. So for those sort of snap translations, it was just a little bit of a time saver, but I didn't do it all the time.
Yeah. And I suppose it depends on whether you have a teaching assistant or whether you're a teaching assistant in the job you're doing. Because if you have another teacher there who speaks their local language, they'll often translate the things that need to be translated. But if you're there by yourself, occasionally it might be useful to speak the local language.
And in my experience of looking around jobs boards, the only country that I know of where they might ever ask for you to have that language to some level is in Spain, where sometimes they will ask for you to have an intermediate level of Spanish in order to apply for the job. And I don't think that really happens in any other country.
No, I haven't noticed it on other in other countries. I'm sure it does happen in other countries, but definitely Spain seems to be the main one that asks for a little bit of Spanish.
Yeah. And that is, I think, because in a lot of those schools, you might also have to do parents' evening. And if the parents can't speak English, you might have to try and attempt to do a parents' evening in Spanish, which sounds absolutely terrifying.
I'm suddenly relieved I didn't have to speak the local language at school.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Issie, would you like to have a look at our second question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Lisa asks, how lucrative is the job market for non-degree holders, and how do we go about finding employment?
Okay, so I think this is probably the question that we get asked the most.
Yeah.
If I don't have a degree, what can I do? So unfortunately, because of some changes to legislation, especially in countries around Asia, you will not be granted a working visa unless you have a degree and you want to go there and teach. But this doesn't mean that applies to every country. It means that there are just large areas of the world that will still be open to you. So Europe and Central and South America would be really, really good options if you are a non-degree holder.
Really the rest of the world is open to non-degree holders. But at the moment, I think Asia has really knuckled down on their visa systems. So a lot of the working visas you need a degree. Just as a basic standard now. I'm not sure whether it's to do with the job itself or whether they just were inundated with applications and they're trying to make a higher criteria.
They're trying to narrow it down a little bit.
We don't really know the reasons, but it is harder and somewhat impossible in some areas of Asia to work without a degree. There are some places, like I think Cambodia, you can work there without a degree, but there's not loads of jobs. I think you'd have to be on the ground there searching for jobs to be able to find something. Most other places in Asia you seem to need a degree. Europe, you definitely can teach without a degree in a lot of places. Germany, Spain, you don't need a degree to work there. And then a lot of South America, you don't need a degree either, which is great. Lots of the world is definitely open to non-degree holders. So if you don't have a degree and you're worrying, can you teach somewhere? You can teach somewhere. Don't let people tell you can't teach.
It might just be a case of being more proactive, reaching out more, and just spending a little bit more time on your application, your intro videos, and all that kind of stuff that you will need in order to apply.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be a little bit more competitive, won't it? And
absolutely.
You'll need to have a really, really great application. Otherwise, maybe get a little bit more experience than the other candidates who have degrees. Get a bit of volunteering experience, or go and help out at a TEFL centre in your home country, something like that, to make you stand out.
Yeah, and it's really surprising the types of things that companies will accept as experience. So anything from babysitting to tutoring someone how to play a musical instrument, it all counts when you're applying for your job.
Yeah, and even like mentoring as well. If you mentored someone at university, you gave some tutoring help to a friend maybe, or that can count as a little bit of teaching experience. So I would really dig deep into your experience, think about what you've done that was teaching someone else, and don't miss it out. It's really important to include that experience in your applications.
Okay, nice. And our final question today comes in from Gary, who says, I am in my 60s and I have never taught English before. Well, it's not too late for you, Gary. He says, am I too old to start teaching English?
No
you
way.
Are not.
No, absolutely not. I think there's lots of countries where they will say no because of the retirement age, and it may be not legal to work in those countries past the retirement age, or the companies find it difficult to find health insurance for you after a certain age. So yes, there will be some places that won't hire you, but there are lots and lots of places that are open to people over the age of 60, or they're not worried about age at all. It's just a matter of researching the local retirement laws and things like that. Definitely possible.
Yeah, and from our research, it looks as though a lot of those places, that it's slightly easier to find jobs at the same places where it's slightly easier to find jobs if you are a non-degree holder, which again is places like Central and Southern America, and then different places in Europe.
Europe as well. You can definitely find work in your 60s. I think, again, Asia is more strict on these kind of things, and it's difficult for the TEFL employers to find the necessary work visa for you or the health insurance for you to be able to work legally over there. So that's why it can be a bit harder. But Europe and Central and South America, you should definitely have some options there.
And the other thing to bear in mind is that you might not always be looking for a job in a school. You might want to go to somewhere and set up your own kind of private company, work independently, grow your own base of students, and run your own business that way, rather than worrying about the kind of visa restrictions based on being employed by a school and trying to get a work permit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Obviously, lots of places have different rules for you being self-employed than if you were being hired by a company. So it's worth doing a little bit of research on self-employment abroad and see if there's some better options out there that way.
Okay.
That's all our questions. Thanks, guys, for the questions. Hopefully we gave you some useful answers on those.
Yeah, and some really interesting questions to discuss as well. And I think the questions that we've been asked and the answers that we've given have given us a little bit of an idea of what we might have our future episodes based around. This week's topic is all about what to expect when you first start teaching abroad. So you might have some expectations before you go. You might imagine yourself on the beach in your bikini, 3 stone lighter than you are.
I definitely saw myself in Paris with a really trendy haircut on a balcony somewhere.
With a baguette.
With a baguette, yeah. Just all the perfect Parisian ideals there. But
and did that come true for you?
No, absolutely not.
Absolutely
I was in
not.
Vietnam with no baguette and no trendy hairstyle, but it was great. So don't worry about the expectations in that way.
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing that came to mind with this topic is it's really important for you to expect the unexpected, as though it's almost like there's no rules in TEFL. Anything goes, and when you might go to somewhere and expect to be teaching one thing and you end up teaching something different, or teaching for this amount of hours per week and you end up teaching 10 more or 10 fewer.
That is definitely the case. I would say a lot of my friends ended up teaching maths in English or science in English, or even doing a bit of sports in English. And it's funny because we get lots of people asking us, can I teach maths English abroad? And there's not many jobs that advertise that. So we can't give you a definite yes, because lots of schools aren't looking for that. But then somehow when you get out abroad, you're asked to do all sorts of random different topics that you never thought you would. So definitely you're asked to do stuff you don't expect to.
And for me, I worked in a school. It was like the only school in the town. They were really, really oversubscribed, and I was promised something like 24 hours of teaching a week, which when you spread it out isn't really that much. I ended up teaching 34 hours a week instead, because they had so many students. They had to put on extra classes. I had extra one-to-one students. And I remember in that first kind of month of being given all of these extra classes, feeling totally overwhelmed. I didn't know how I was gonna plan for that amount of classes in the week.
That sounds really overwhelming, especially when you expect to work 20-something.
The worst part, I don't want to say the worst part because I really enjoyed it, but I was teaching almost every level, and I couldn't really use the same material or the same lesson plan for different classes in the week. It was like I had to prepare 34 different lesson plans, which was really stressful at the time. But you kind of just get on with it. You get faster, you get more efficient with your planning.
And the first term is always kind of overwhelming, just because it's new and you're teaching new things. Some of the things you're teaching are new to you, so you're picking it up and then going and teaching it a few days later. But I think after that first term, a lot of the time you get a new class that's going to do the course, and you end up reusing material you've taught before.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It gets easier because you get better and better at teaching that particular lesson or topic.
Yeah, and you've already built your relationship with your students. You know all their names, you know their interests, and the classes run a little bit smoother after the first term. So sort of don't be put off by the shock, both the culture shock perhaps of the country and then the shock of the school itself, because it will all come good in the end.
Yeah.
The other things that I thought about were, well, I want to touch on culture shock a little bit. If you're moving to something where the lifestyle is going to be totally different, the food's different, obviously the language will be different, and things like etiquette and manners are going to be different. It might all come as a little bit of a shock. Izzy, did you experience culture shock in Vietnam?
For sure, yeah, it was. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to go there as well. It was because it was so different to anywhere I'd been before. I'd only holidayed in Europe before, and I did imagine myself teaching in Europe at first. And then when I went and visited Vietnam, I thought, this is chaotic, insane. It's absolute madness. And I thought that was really exciting. When I visited somewhere like France, I thought, yeah, I can imagine myself living here. I could do this. It's not that different from home. And when I was in Vietnam, I genuinely thought, could I do this? This is a bit mad, like a little bit scary in a good way. I didn't know whether I could actually live my life there. And that was kind of the challenge I was looking forward to. But yeah, the culture shock was definitely a big thing, because little things like smiling, like I always smile at people, strangers, just to show I'm nice. I'm trying to. I'm just trying to buy a sandwich here, but I'm gonna smile at you. And they don't really do that so much in Vietnam, and it's. They're not trying to be rude. It's not that they're not nice. It's just they're not super smiley. They show their friendliness in other ways. They use particular pronouns to speak to you, and obviously that went straight over my head because I was just smiling inanely at people I didn't understand, and they were trying to be polite to me in a totally different way. So yeah, there was definitely a good few months where I felt a little bit worried and kind of out of sorts because I didn't understand what was going on. And then as I got used to it over a period of time, I realised actually everyone's lovely and making an effort to make me feel at home. I just need to understand how they're doing it. But yeah, what about you? Any culture shock in Poland?
No, I was just trying to rack my brains then. I can't really think of anything that stood out. Certain things, like you say, perhaps not to do with smiling so much, but to do with manners. I was incredibly over-polite in the way that I spoke Polish. It would be the equivalent of saying, pretty please, with a cherry on top, can I have this bottle of water?
That was exactly the same in Vietnamese.
They would just say, can I have the water?
Yeah. In Vietnamese, they just say, give me this, which is even better.
Yeah.
I kept asking, how can I say, can I please have this? And my teacher kept saying, no, we don't say that. That's silly. No one's going to say that. They just say, give me this. And it's perfectly polite to do it there.
I'm just trying to think, what are the culture shock related things I experienced, but really not a lot. It's not a massively different culture, I would say. I was kind of inspired by people's attitudes to work, to fitting in lots of extracurricular things around their job. I was just so surprised how people make their 24 hours really count, which I think personally, or as Brits, we don't do so much. We kind of go to work and then we come home and watch Netflix and then we go to bed and then we do it again the next day. But there it's all about fitting in all of the extracurricular stuff. I found it quite inspiring and felt incredibly lazy, but not a bad shock. That was quite a nice thing to discover about other people and made me feel a little bit more motivated.
Nice, I think the main shock, now I think about it, was how blunt the people were in Vietnam. It took me a while to get used to that. When I first started my job, the first 3 questions were, like, how old are you? Are you married? Like, do you have kids? Why don't you have kids? Why aren't you married? Like, how much is your rent? And, like, how much are you getting paid? They just asked you everything. And I was just totally stunned by these questions at first.
Did you answer?
I don't remember now. I think I
What did you say? I don't understand.
I think I answered the first few questions and then kind of awkwardly mumbled and made an excuse to leave or something like that. But then a few months later, when I got used to it and I saw it happening to every other new teacher, I really got into it. I got into asking other people, like, hey, are you married? Do you have kids?
It's an excuse to be really nosy.
I loved it. Yeah, I got into being nosy and I really appreciated that you were allowed to. I could, if I asked that to...
I just want to know.
Yeah, I want to know all these things. Can I ask you? I mean, here, if you were trying to find out if someone had a boyfriend or girlfriend, you would kind of tiptoe around the subject. Be like, so who do you live with? And
do you like anyone in particular?
No, and there you just be like, do you have a girlfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? They made it very easy to find out
Again,
things.
time saving and efficient. Other things that we can talk about to do with, what to expect before you move abroad. Is, obviously there's loads of positives, new culture, new friends, once in a lifetime opportunities, great food, all of the travels, seeing a new country, experiencing all of these things are obviously all absolutely brilliant, and are going to happen regardless of where in the world you choose to go. And the other thing that I would like to touch on before we finish this section is that regardless of whether you're going to be living and working in that place for a short time or a really long time, it's all going to help you develop your skills so that if you want to move on to a different teaching job or move into somewhere else in the industry, you'll really have a good background, some really nice experience to put on your CV. You'll know how to teach. You'll have all of the teaching techniques in your back pocket, and it will pave the way for the rest of your teaching career.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning experience, isn't it? Whatever your first job is like when you start teaching overseas, it's just a starting point, really. You realise, okay, yes, I can stand in front of a class and teach. This is what I need to improve on, this is what I'm good at, and just start to learn about where to find that information and, find some other teachers to get some advice from and things like that. It's just, the first job is a good starting point. If you decide to stick with it for a year or 2 years or more, fantastic. If you decide, actually, this job isn't for me, I'm going to look for another one, that's still good. You're still going to have a good starting point and some experience to come from.
So, let's move on to the next section of our podcast today, which is featuring one of my top teaching tips. This one, I know,
Sorry,
yes.
You left a long pause. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Woo. So this is something that I decided to put into the first TEFL Talk episode because it's something that I think is very easily neglected when you're a brand new teacher, because you're asking people to do something that sometimes they are quite reluctant to do, and that is stand up and change partners. Why is this important, you ask, Jenny? Have you ever sat next to somebody for a really long time and you don't like them? That's why. It's very important that you don't have people sitting next to each other. When they don't like them, you can just move them.
Not an educational purpose
I was coming to that, but my number. So
Okay.
I had some Spanish lessons, and I was sat next to somebody who, let's be frank, was rubbish at Spanish. And I really wanted to practice with someone who was going to sort of challenge me a little bit or make me think. But they were, they weren't doing their homework. They weren't trying very hard. And I was really frustrated that I felt like I wasn't progressing because the person next to me wasn't helping.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
And it was the only time I had in the week to speak Spanish. I could do all that I wanted to do at home with my workbook. But it really helped when the teacher would move everyone every sort of 15 minutes, and then you got to meet more people in the class. So my educational reasons, I guess, are that, so that people don't get bored. You encourage class dynamics because people will get to know everybody else. and that you speak to people who have different levels. You'll speak to people with the same level, people with a higher level, and people possibly with a weaker level. But, you know, people are creatures of habit, and it's really common for people to come into a classroom and sit down in the same seat every lesson. So you as the teacher have this kind of responsibility to mix them all up so that
definitely.
they...
don't repeat the same questions and answers to each other. I definitely had students who would come and sit next to each other and just repeat the same. It was almost like a dialogue they'd practice. I'd say, you know, go and talk about this. And they would just be like, where are you from? I'm from Vietnam. Where are you from? I'm from, you know, I was like, guys, you really need to branch out. So I can totally understand why that would work really well, and mix it up, get them to ask different people different questions.
Yeah, exactly. So I've got a couple of ideas that I thought I could share with you of how to do this. I mean, obviously you can just say, Carolina and Paula, can you change seats? And that's enough. You can turn it into a game, which is especially helpful with younger learners or teenagers, but it works with adults as well, which is you say something like, okay, if you are wearing glasses, swap seats with someone else.
I love that
If
game.
you are wearing a watch, swap seats with someone else. And then you can be really cruel and say something like, if you are wearing jeans, and everyone will be wearing jeans, they all have to change seats.
Smart, yeah.
Yes. Alternatives to this, which I quite like, is please can you go and sit next to someone that you don't know very well, because then it gives them the you know, it's their choice who they sit next to, but they're also going, oh, I don't really know him, I'll go and talk to him today. You can also do things like putting post-it notes on the desk with the person's name on it before the lesson, so they know where to sit. And then if you have any kind of break in the lesson, you can swap all the post-it notes about, and they will find that seat when they come back in. I'm just going to do a BBC turnover of the page.
Very good. I hardly even noticed it.
I am a newsreader in my spare time. And my alternative to that is dividing your desks into different colours, so you can maybe stick a piece of coloured paper onto the desks, and then when people come into the class you can say, okay, you're red, you're blue, you're yellow, and they sit in that area of the classroom, and that way you're kind of you're creating a seating plan for them, but they still feel like they are, like it's random. And I think the worst thing to do is deliberately like change people's seats if they're naughty. I think don't use it as a punishment, make it part of your routine. And then if people are messing around and you want to swap the seats, it will just be part of your lesson anyway, that you change seats at the end of the activity. So use it for that. Classroom management too. Is there any other ideas?
I made almost everything in my classes into a competition.
Very nice.
It's obviously it benefits some learners and it doesn't benefit others, but I found with most of my classes the kids were I mostly taught children, so they were 12 and under. Some of them were as young as 3, so so they really just like games and competitions. And when you split the class into 2 and say, you know, you get to name your own team, which is always great because they're always something like Rainbow Dragon, and the other team wants to be even cooler, so they're like super duper Rainbow Butterfly King, and that's part of the fun.
That's my drag name.
But yeah, it just makes it more, I don't know, a better dynamic in the class when they can compete with each other. Like I said, not good for every type of student, but definitely my classes love to get points on the board, support their team members. Even when it was something as little as a spelling competition, we'd get them lining up in rows and kind of racing to spell things and passing the pen along. So it was a bit of a spelling relay, and they loved those kind of things. So my advice would be make things competitive.
Yay.
In a healthy way, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so before we wrap up this first episode of TEFL Talk, I thought I could finish with a little story. Izzy, it's up to you if you want to kind of prepare a story while I'm talking. I know this has come as a shock.
Yeah, thanks for the last minute notice. Great.
So this is a story that I thought I would tell because I don't think I've told you about this, Izzy, before. And I've been keeping it a secret all day. Don't look at the page now.
I'm not going to.
So this happened probably a couple of years ago, and I was teaching in the UK, and I had a lovely boy. He was from Saudi Arabia. He was 17. He was in my elementary class. I can't remember his name because I have had so many students in my time and I have a terrible memory. But because it was the end of his stay in the UK and he was going home, he decided to get me a present.
Lovely.
Which was very sweet. So he presented me with a gift bag.
Is this in front of a class, or are you?
I think this was the end of the lesson.
Okay.
But you know, he was in my class, and at the end of the lesson, he presented me with this gift bag that he'd had in his rucksack all day and keeping it a surprise. And he, gave it to me, and I opened the gift bag and pulled out a teddy bear, which was very, very sweet. Right. But on the front of the teddy bear, it said in big letters, "To my darling daughter." My darling daughter, I am the daughter of a 17-year-old boy from Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And I don't know, Jenny, it goes to show that I'm a terrible teacher.
It makes me really question how much English this boy was learning.
We just watched videos and played games and we didn't learn family members. I don't
trust any of your advice after that now.
But it was just such an innocent, he'd obviously gone to a shop and thought, what will she like? She would like a teddy bear, obviously, because she's...
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Because she's my daughter.
My daughter would like a teddy bear. I think the hardest part was, I couldn't show the fact that this was really funny, and I had, I was genuinely very grateful and loved the opportunity to tell anecdotes. So thank you for that.
I love that.
But yeah, that's my first anecdote because it is the one thing. I still have that teddy bear.
Did you tell him that?
No,
okay.
I just let him think that daughter meant... I don't know what he thought it meant. Or darling.
Yeah, maybe that's what he thought. But darling, yeah, I just...
He definitely didn't run that through Google Translate.
No. Let's just assume it was the last teddy bear in the shop and that it wasn't
in the reduced pile. No.
Yeah.
And I still have it, and I keep it as a memento of very happy times with that student. Izzy, have you ever received a gift from a student, and will it top that?
I certainly haven't received any gifts as good as that. Main gifts were just food. They just the students really like feeding you, which was great. I'm afraid my gift stories aren't as good as yours. I did have some issues learning the names of the students, not because they were difficult Vietnamese names, actually, because I worked at a language centre, so this is the after-school classes, and to make it kind of fun and quirky, all the students were asked to come up with their own English name with, I'm making quote marks, you can't see them, but I'm making quote marks. And so these English names could be something like Sarah or Adam, or they could be Batman or, Barbie, which many of them were. And it's really difficult to tell off a child when you're like, stop it, Spider-Man. It's really have to be serious. But there was a couple of kids in one class that didn't choose English names, so they just kept their own names. One was called Kentu, and one was called Kenwan. And I was like, these are just the cutest names. I thought they were lovely. They were in the back of my head for baby names. I was thinking, great, like, if I have a Vietnamese partner in the future, then Kenwan and Kentu, great. And then the first day I went to write their names on the board, when we were kind of giving them stars and things, I wrote how I expected it to be spelt. Let's guess it Kenwan or something like that. And the other teacher there said, that is not the name. What do you think it is? And I said, Kenwan. And she was like, no, Ken1. Ken number 1 and Ken number 2.
No.
Like, oh my goodness, not only have I been pronouncing 1 and 2 wrong, now all of the students have been pronouncing 1 and 2 wrong because I thought Ken 1 and Ken 2 were cute Vietnamese names. So
That's the best.
yes, I mean, very stupid on my part, and after that I always got a list of students' names and learnt them in advance. Yeah, I think mainly my stories are of stupidity, so I'll just leave it at that.
That's a genuinely brilliant story. I'm very pleased that
Thank you.
you've shared it with us on this
I kind of
platform.
wish I hadn't, but anyway, thanks. So we've come to the end of our first TEFL talk. I think it was a successful one, which it had to be.
I really enjoyed myself.
I enjoyed talking. I don't know whether
There was
we
no
enjoyed
bass.
listening to it. Yeah, that's a good thing. Hopefully it'll just get better and better from here. And we promised you at the beginning of the TEFL talk that we would give you a promo code for listening all the way through. So whether you listened all the way through or forwarded all the way through, thanks.
In which case you have missed out on some good times.
Yeah, you missed out on some good stuff, but also well done for, being smart and
Using your initiative.
Yes, also great job there. So the promo code to get some money off I2I, whether it's the courses or internships or any of their other products, is TEFL Talk 1. That's all capitals, TEFL Talk 1, number 1.
Not Ken 1
not
or Ken
Ken 1.
2.
Thank you.
TEFL
Yep.
Talk
Thanks.
1,
Yep.
number 1, not the word.
Nice and easy. So hopefully if you have anything that you want to buy from the I2I website, then just pop that code in and get a little gift from us. I think that's all from us. Jenny, any final words?
Yes, many words.
Okay.
So, of course, every single episode we're going to be asking for your questions so that we can answer them here in the TEFL Talks studio. If you have any burning questions
I love that you said studio.
I am so
I
fancy.
sat on a sofa with one little
with
microphone
a
between
microphone
us.
on a box.
Yes.
Get those thoughts of us in headsets in a recording studio out of your minds. So if you have any questions today that you would like to be answered on the podcast, you can contact us at tefltalk@teachandtravelgroup.com. That is,
Catchy.
I know, the longest email address, tefltalk@teachandtravelgroup.com. I'm sure all of our contact details will be made available somewhere on the internet, so you can always find them online. But again, tefltalk@teachandtravelgroup.com.
And the code, just to remind you, TEFL Talk 1.
Episode 2 will be coming to you shortly, and in that episode we will be talking about teaching English online. This again is one of those big topics that we get asked loads and loads of questions on all of the time, so if you're
tons of
interested in being your own boss, working for yourself, earning money from your sofa,
Yes.
tune
Living the
in.
dream.
Living the dream.
Yep.
Tune in to that episode on discussing teaching English online. We'll let you know when it's released. But thank you so much to Izzy for joining us
Thank
on
you,
TEFL
Jenny.
Talk on our first foray into podcasting. And see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
We've been talking TEFL Talk. Talking TEFL with TEFL Talk. We've been talking TEFL Talk. Talking TEFL with TEFL Talk.